Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Men and Sex. I'm your host, Mr. Wood. This podcast is all about normalizing the taboo conversations. We're here to talk about sex. We're here to talk about masturbation and pleasure and do it in a good way, bringing back that sacredness. Today, we've got an amazing guest, Leola Watkins, best-selling author of Sacred Sex Ed, host of the Talk Tantra To Me podcast, and co-creator of the Tantra Love and Transformation Retreats, which I just attended, so we get to talk about that. Welcome to the show, Leola.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to all the listeners for being willing to go to those dark and taboo places. To me, the taboo is where so much of our power is. So, really honoring you for showing up for that. And yeah, thank you for creating this space. It's really heartwarming and special for me to see a man having these conversations, creating space for these conversations, and supporting other men, really showing up in your king energy. So thank you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I'm curious, what brought you to Tantra? How long have you been doing this dance? And give us a little bit of a background before we dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I fell into this world and work. It doesn't make sense that I do what I do when you look at where I come from, where I grew up. I grew up in small town in Missouri. Most people from where I'm from, got married young, had kids young, stayed in the vicinity of where I grew up in this small town. And that wasn't my path and that wasn't my journey. However, it did really lay a foundation for me to understand my clientele as well as this world and work better because I was able to kind of go on my own journey of healing and reclamation. I had what I would call an inherently traumatizing sex education. And I believe that most people in America and in the Western world also had an inherently traumatizing sex education. I believe that you don't need to have a certain, you know, experience in your life that you can point at and say, oh, that was my sexual assault. That's where I got my sexual trauma. To me, it's the way that we're approaching intimacy, our bodies, sexuality, our potential, scarcity, money, religion, all of these things that are inherently traumatizing because many of them
Mm.
are fear and shame based, limiting. There's lots of projections from our parents, from our early intimate experiences with other kids, from religion, from the government, from school sex ed, etc. And so I kind of had the gamut of that growing up in a pretty conservative area. And for me, this idea, like I felt though the life force in my body. I felt the
Mm.
turn on. I felt the arrows, right? And so when I was coming of age in my preteen slash teen years, I was given this fear, shame-based projection of my body, my sexuality, and also just generally what was possible for me in life. And I was like, something doesn't land. Like,
Mm.
I don't get how this could feel so ecstatic, like connecting with my body and learning about my body, and how this act can be an expression of love, but can also be like sinful. Like I just didn't get it. I didn't get it. And so for me, my reaction to that was, well, I'm going to figure it out for myself since no one is giving me any information that's really useful or is landing. So that resulted in me putting myself in many somewhat dangerous circumstances, like legitimately. And I experienced, sexual assault and many moments where I just like wasn't getting what I desired. My desires weren't prioritized. I had boundaries, but I didn't know what they were. I didn't know how to communicate them. And so by the time I was in my early 20s, I was just carrying like so much baggage. I was on the path to follow the quote unquote American dream. I was, doing really well in college, was on the track to like move to New York and be a fashion editor. And yeah, I just realized like I discovered spirituality and that was great, the meditation and the yoga
Yeah.
and like that stuff. But it wasn't really getting to like the deeper bits. Like I was feeling this call deep, like these modalities, in my opinion, aren't fully holistic because they are not acknowledging or integrating the very energy that brought us all into the world, which is sex. Like every one of us is here because two people decided to have sex. Every animal, every plant, therefore, like, the food that we eat. And really, like, if anyone listening were to look around themselves, no matter where you are, like almost everything that you see was either directly made by sex or was created by someone or something that was created by sex. So then I discovered Tantra, and Tantra isn't about just sex, but it does acknowledge that this energy is the foundation of our existence, right? So that really lit me up and landed in a really powerful way. And that's kind of how I got into the path, but I'll stop there because I gave you a little monologue.
Yeah, thank you so much. No, it's beautiful to hear your story. And I just want to share with the listeners my experience of you because I think it really matches your story, which is, what my eyes see and then how I experience you. Which you're for me, it's like you're this tiny young woman, and like to my eyes, I would think like maybe the normal view would be like, okay, this woman's probably insecure, she's probably young, figuring out her way in life. And like I would make up all these stories because of how I see you, how my eyes see you. But then my experience of you is just like so grounded, so secure in yourself, and this wisdom is just coming out of you. And I can see the part of your story that you said you put yourself in dangerous positions, that you were like willing to risk these things to learn for yourself through
Yeah.
experience because no one was putting that path in front of you to teach you. So it was like, all right, I'm gonna go find out. And part of that, in this world, particularly as a smaller, petite woman, is there are bigger, more overpowering people that you're interacting with that can lead to those dangerous situations. And what's coming up for me is gratitude for your courageousness. And I feel similar in my own path that I feel that responsibility because I have courage naturally woven into me, and a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't have the courage that we have to go out and explore in more dangerous or wild or weird ways so that, you come back and you write a book, you teach these things, and we can create spaces where people can come do it in a good way and not have to be as courageous.
Yeah, and for those listening, I will also say that it's a muscle because I have been and will always still have that version inside of me of that young, insecure, afraid girl, right? And nowadays I have a book. I have a book that I wrote that has the word sex on the cover, which even in the process of publishing that book, even after having my own podcast and doing all these retreats and talking very openly about sex, having the word on a cover of a book with my name on it was deeply like terrifying for me. And I got to that place from making small risks over time that became bigger and bigger and more bold, and noticing when I do the thing that I'm most afraid of, there is always a harvest. There's always something I learn from it. Even if it doesn't go how I think or how I want it to go, there's always something in that for me.
Mm.
And that's something that, I think that people have to kind of learn on their own in their own time. And to also do it, at the pace of their nervous system as well, which, as you know, that's a big part of my work too, is like, knowing your nervous system and expanding that capacity in a empowered and organic way.
One thing when I have guests on that are in the world of Tantra that I'd love to just ask, because I think it's one of those words like God, where or
Yeah.
love. There's so many definitions. Is like, what is Tantra to you in your experience? Obviously we could talk about it for hours,
Yeah.
but like as buttoned up as you can be.
Yeah, I've got a thread on this one. So Tantra. Tantra is really misunderstood and misconstrued, mostly because there are just so many lineages that call themselves Tantra. So you have, Neo Tantra, which is new Tantra. That's what most people in the Western world think of when they think about Tantra. It's a more sexualized expression of Tantra. But you also have Taoism and you have Egyptian Tantra, and then you have, classical Tantra. And even in classical Tantra, which is the Tantra that generally speaking comes from East Asia, even within that like lineage, there's over 50 different sects of Tantra. Like there's over 50 different branches within that. And within the classical Tantra, that ranges from a very monastic expression of the lineage all the way up to like, orgies and weird rituals where like you're, drinking semen and like all kinds of interesting things. So like there's just such a wide breadth of what Tantra is, what it's called, and there's beauty in that, right? So for me, to clear things up, I like to go to the word itself. So
Mm.
Tantra is a Sanskrit word. Sanskrit is a ancient language from East Asia in which many spiritual and religious texts have been written over the centuries. And Tantra is actually two words or concepts put together. Tantra. So tan translates to expand, and
Mm.
tra is liberate. So when we're talking about
Oh.
Tantra and what is Tantra, like if you look at etymologically, the word means expansion and liberation. And what I love about that is that it's so broad. Like what's expansive and liberating to me is very different than what it's going to be for you. And even for me, what's expansive and liberating this year is very different than what it was just 12 months ago. And so to me, Tantra is really about this self-awareness and this calibration to what ways of being in this season of life are getting me closer to my highest self, to my expansion and liberation. And you can run that through every channel of your life. You can run it through your diet. There's been seasons where veganism made sense for me. There's been seasons where paleo made sense for me, but you can also run it through relating styles. There's been seasons where I've been very monogamous. There's been seasons where I've been solo polyamorous, monogamish, everything. And it's not that any one of those ways of being was wrong or bad. It was about my calibration to that way of being the vehicle in that season.
That's my favorite answer yet.
Yes.
Favorite answer yet. And it's so easy for me to see that, and it perfectly aligns with my belief system. So, thank you for that. That us talking about sex is definitely part of that and an important part of that because there's so much secretive, hiding, don't talk about it.
Yeah.
One of the things that brought me on this path was being in men's personal development and over and over and over hearing men say, I've never told that to anyone in my life. And these
Yeah.
are 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old men that are saying this, and it was always when it was talking about sexuality. And I'm like, okay, this is probably really important because this is all pointing towards the secrets, the hiding, which usually equates to shame and feeling there's
Uh-huh.
something wrong with me. Because why wouldn't I talk about something if I didn't feel it was wrong, bad, shameful, whatever?
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. There's so much empowerment that comes from shining a light into these parts of ourselves that we've learned are bad, wrong, shameful. But it's these parts of ourselves, again, where so much of our magic and our power lands. And we don't create safety or acceptance by ignoring these parts of ourselves. We do it by actually mastering these parts of ourselves, by having the conversations, by stepping into sacred and empowered, sovereign, safe spaces to explore and embody these parts of ourselves with other like-minded people.
Now, you're a woman. I
I
know that
am.
you work with priestesses and lots of women. And in the personal development world across the board, I've seen in a lot of the spaces more women than men. What is your experience running your Tantra Love Retreat the last, I think, 8 years or something like that? Are you, and being in this world for however long as you have, are you seeing men start to show up for this kind of expansion and liberation more, or what are you seeing?
I love this question. I feel very privileged to say that I see a lot of men in this world and work. And that's kind of how I got started actually in this world and work. So I mentioned that I kind of fell into doing this professionally, and my first mentor in this world, not like teaching me this stuff, because like I had many different teachers, men and women that taught me Tantra, but the first man that was like my business mentor, was one who received from me, we were friends, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna do some tantric body work on you. And he had this incredible catharsis. I talk about it in the very first chapter of my book. He had this deep, like, inner child awakening, was crying, and he told me, I've gone to therapy, I've done plant medicine, I've done all the things. And this is the most profound, breakthrough that I've had. And it was like an accident, you know? And so he really encouraged me to pursue this work professionally and kind of mentored me a little bit on the business side of things. But he was kind of my first client, if you would say.
Oh.
And so when I fell into this work, I was actually working mostly with men. These days, what I'm most passionate about is working with women to inspire them to step into their priestess gifts, to bring that to their lovers, to initiate and work with more men, women, and couples and with themselves. Because it's my belief that every woman has this priestess, this leader in love inside of her. So that's really where my passion is now. I do work with some men, but that's how I started actually.
Mm.
But to me, like with men, I just feel like the world has asked a lot of you and placed just these heavy burdens, while offering little space to like reconnect with, you know, their true essence. And there's lots of criticism about men right now. I feel like men are feeling really blamed, they're feeling misunderstood, they're feeling unworthy. But the truth is that like we really need men. Like we deeply, deeply need warriors, we need kings. And this isn't a debate about either gender being better or more evolved or hurt by the other. The truth is that men have been victims of the very same system as women, and we've all felt disconnected from our true nature, from our authentic selves. And I don't feel like men need to carry that weight alone, that it's a collective wound. But again, like I have seen so many men show up super regularly in my work, in my containers. They're ready to go there. And I think that there's an equal invitation for women to look at, what is your part in this? But what I see most profoundly is like the work that we do individually is amazing, the work that men and women do individually, but like that's only 10% of it. The work that happens when men and women come together, and heal together and come into relationship is the most beautiful and profound.
Mm.
Um, so that's my
Mm.
thought.
I love that. Something percolated for me in talking about the priestess, and I'm curious. I've heard little whispers of past rituals or things. The one that's coming to mind is like when the men came back from war, and
Yeah.
that they would go to like see a version of a priestess or something before coming back into the city. I'm curious your knowledge of things like this, where there was a societal need for such a thing.
Yeah, so, in ancient times, the story is that when men went away to battle, instead of coming home directly to their wives, their children, they would first come to the priestess to work through all of the baggage and the turmoil and the internal gunk that gets accumulated when you are protecting what you value or what your, country values. And so they would come home to the priestesses first, and the priestesses would bathe them and like, the armor, men in war would have physical armor, but there's also the body keeps the score, right? Like there's the armor that we take on in war as well. So they would do de-armoring work. And, in some levels there was a lot of like heart de-armoring and love poured in, and priestesses expanding their own energy and channel to clear and alchemize. And then there were also more intimate and sexual practices as well. um so yeah, that's kind of the myth and the story, and the idea is that these men were able to go back to their lives whole and healed rather than carrying those burdens and projecting them onto their family. And you look at where we are today as a society, and like all of the men that come back from war and have PTSD and can't feed themselves and are living on the streets, or are mentally just totally disoriented or physically disoriented. And what programs do we really have to support them, if any? Like, we have the VA, but like it's pretty much fucked. If I mean, like, I don't know all the stats. I'm not
Yeah, yeah.
intimate in that world and work, but that's what I've seen and heard. And so yeah, it's a messy space. And the curiosity is, what if women, whether they are the wives of these warriors or otherwise, were there to support and to de-armor and to help these men process? And there's also this reality that even though a lot of the men in our lives today aren't going away to a war, like,
Yeah.
Afghanistan or whatever, men today have their own wars. They're going to war at work. They're going to war in their minds. They're going to war for what they believe in and value, in their communities. And we also get to consider that the weight that we put on men to protect and provide for us, and the war that creates internally in the system. So as women, how can we use our unique gifts to support that as well? And knowing that, like, when that happens, we end up getting more as well as women.
When you were talking about that, I saw the visuals of when an animal has been treated poorly, like chained up to something, not fed well, like has all this trauma, and it's like scared of people at first. But then it's
Yeah.
like that gentleness, that love that keeps coming, that softens that creature up, and it becomes a completely different version that's open to love and connection and all these things in a way that it wasn't before. And I can see how much sense that makes to go off to war, see your friends die, to have to hurt people, kill people, do things that are, and just so much psychological baggage that I can just see that medicine and how potent that would be, the
Yeah.
necessity of it. In the going back to that thread of expansion and liberation, one of the subjects that you talk a lot about is pleasure.
Hmm.
And I want to really go into this subject around pleasure because I think that it's a tricky, very nuanced subject to dive into, and something that I was talking to you about before the call is that pleasure can often lead people, like it's talked about, this the seven deadly sins: eating too much food, being too lazy, scrolling the phone all the time. Like, it can take us down that direction, but it can also lead to expansion and liberation. And I've seen both versions in my life. And so I'd love to just dive into pleasure, both as a subject that people are afraid of, but then the paths that also lead to expansion and liberation.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is something that in some ways I'm kind of getting the beginnings of my next book together. And this is something that I feel very passionate to highlight because, there are so many of us that approach healing from and like shadow work from this energy of like hard work and like intensity and cry and like catharsis. And I think that that's all really beautiful and powerful. And pleasure and sexuality is also one of the most powerful ways to heal, to work through our fears and our past wounds, because pleasure and sensuality brings us into the body and into the present moment and into direct relationship with our creative energy, with our procreative life force. Now, there's also pleasure that is used to escape, right? Like, to me, pleasure is a medicine. And just like any medicine, it can be used to heal, but it can also be used poorly and, in addictive patterns, ways, shapes, forms, etc. So it's really about what's your relationship to pleasure as medicine. But, pleasure, whether it's through orgasm or just like eating good food or dancing, moving your body, those types of things, it's scientifically proven that pleasure, boosts the immune system. It lowers stress. It regulates the nervous system, therefore, supports our mental health. Literally, pleasure can add years to your life. And I think that a lot of people are relating to pleasure, A, as like bad, selfish, wrong, or B, I just don't have time for it. And in reality, when you're in right relationship with pleasure, it can add years to your life, which is really cool. Um, and I could speak more too about like, specifically like what this can look like. And we did a little ritual sort of about this at the retreat. Um, but yeah, it's really, in my opinion, it comes down to your relationship with pleasure and knowing yourself and your patterns and your addictive behaviors.
Yeah, and I think there's some subjects weaving here, which is, I talked to so many men, and I obviously was on my own path where their initiation into pleasure was in hiding.
Yep.
So many men, the majority of men, their relationship to pleasure was watching porn or for I was the last generation of like the scribbly channel. Like I straight up remember, oh, it's nighttime. Like I'm gonna find a scribbly channel where I'm gonna see some B-rated porn or something. And it's all secretive. There's no one to talk to, but it's so good. It feels so good. It's like being a teenager, there's all those hormones, testosterone is running through us. We're just like, what is going on here? It's this beautiful thing, but there's no leadership, there's no guidance, and with that is nobody's talking about it. And so in nobody talking about it is just making up, well, there must be something bad about it if nobody's talking about it. And then
Yep.
all the collective consciousness of different religions of wrongness and, lust as this deadly sin. And so it's just what I've come to find, what so many men are facing is the mind had to make things up about pleasure and about sexuality because there was nothing there. And so a man just made things up based upon his unique circumstances. And
Yeah.
the relationship to their cock, to pleasure, often what becomes the main thing is the soothing, is the kind of the medicinal side that becomes the escape, like a pain pill that becomes something I take because I don't want to feel anymore. And so the
Uh-huh.
the connection to healthy pleasure as expansion and liberation is never really curated because no one's there to guide it, but it becomes that soothing, coping, avoiding regulation. I think that's what so many men are facing in their relationship to pleasure right now.
Yeah, I feel that so many people, men and women, learn about sexuality in the dark, behind closed doors, trying to get it over with as fast as possible. So there's this urgency, then trying to be as quiet as possible. So then there's no authentic expression, and then hiding the evidence so that they're not, caught in the end. And we don't realize how often we're carrying those same patterns into our adult relationships and our relationship to intimacy and to sexuality. And what ends up happening is that we leave a lot on the table. Like for me, before I really stepped into this world and work, I thought that there were two types of sex. I thought that there was good sex and there was bad sex. And lo and behold, most of my sex was bad sex, in that my bar for good sex was very low because I didn't know what I really wanted. I never had a safe space to really like go into that and develop a healthy relationship to desire. I was fuzzy on my boundaries, didn't know what my boundaries were, was terrified to speak my boundaries, even if I did know what they were, because I'm a people pleaser. And mostly I just like didn't even know what was possible. I didn't know what was on the table. I had no connection to what I would call sacred sexuality. I didn't have any idea of what my intimacy could create if I got really intentional. And I left the quality of my intimacy and sex up to chance, mainly because I just went in with zero intention and expected my partners to read my mind. And so when I like to think about pleasure on purpose, the question or the curiosity that opens up is, imagine what would happen if you were intentional. What would happen if you decided every sexual experience, whether it was self-pleasure or maybe even just like an intimate makeout or full on sex. What if every sexual experience you had got you closer to your higher self or God or whatever you believe in? And that's really what's interesting to me in this season. And that's like the bar. Like that's the bar now for sex.
Yeah, and I think even something as simple as the intention, bringing in intention is something that most are lacking. It's like, what is my intention behind this interaction, whether it's with self, whether it's with another? And because the bar is so low in education and communication, that it's like there is an intention and the understanding of what can be done with intention is missing. So even just that step of like, what do I want to happen in this experience of me touching my own body in a pleasurable way?
Yeah, and we get stuck in this cycle where like we feel like we shouldn't for one reason or another, but then we do it because it feels good and we feel that connection and that turn on, but then we feel shameful afterwards. Whereas like what if you could just like leave the shame at the door and instead go in saying like I'm going to use this intentionally. I'm going to use this, this moment of self-pleasure to, maybe like I mean, maybe this is a time where I could share more about the four types of sex. How do you feel about that? Okay,
Yeah.
great. So the four types of sex, the first time I was, brought I came to know this was at a shamanic sexuality training called ISTA. And it was something that I'd already experienced, but this added a framework that was really supportive to me. So there are four types of sex. The first type is reproductive. Reproductive is exactly what it sounds like. It's the type of sex that you're having with the intention of creating life, which on its surface, great. Like we love that. If you want to have a baby, awesome. But like if you're just having reproductive sex and there's not pleasure or alchemy or like joy in it, like it starts to feel like, okay, we're two like animals that are like not in a hot primal way, but in a way like I'm a barn animal. You know what I mean? Like breeding, like it doesn't
Yeah.
feel great.
Yeah.
Then you have, so that's the first type, reproductive. Then you have recreational. So recreational, also what it sounds like. It's the type of sex or intimacy that you are having with the intention of pleasure and joy and just for the sake of feeling good, which love it. On the surface, great, nothing wrong with that. And this type of intimacy often is very goal oriented. It's like, let's both try to come as soon as possible, or maybe even it's focused on just one person coming as soon as possible, rather than like allowing that energy to grow and to expand and being in a sort of edging practice, if you will, that could potentially open up to multi orgasms, full body orgasms, non ejaculatory orgasms, or just more in general. So again, sex for sex sake, also fine with. But here's where things start to get juicy when you introduce the next two types of sex. And I also want to be clear that not every instance of sex or self-pleasure or intimacy is going to fit cleanly into one type. For example, like my husband and I are in a conscious conception phase, so we're having reproductive sex, but it's very rarely just reproductive. Usually there's some of these other types woven in. So the third type of intimacy or sex is restorative. And restorative
Ooh.
intimacy is the type where you're using that connection and that life force to heal your body, your mind, your heart, or your soul. And this is kind of built on like if you're familiar with Joe Dispenza's work, like emotions, energy and motion, like when you bottle shit up and you don't process things, this creates dis-ease in the energetic body. These emotions or energy and motion are stuck. And what happens when you're, connecting intimately or sexually is that that energy, that kundalini at the base of your spine is moving up and out and is allowing some of these things to clear or to express. This is why you might sometimes like cry during sex and you're like, I have no idea why I'm crying. It's because you're moving energy and it's allowing you to have a restorative sexual experience. Makeup sex is another great example of restorative intimacy. Not that I, condone using sex as like the band-aid for all things in your relationship,
Yeah.
but like if my husband and I go like a week or so without having sex, like we start to get a little shitty towards each other. And it's like this is helping move that energy and helping us come back into cohesion, into
Mm,
connection. I'll give another example. A lot of people, when they're stressed out or they're like feeling a headache coming on or whatever, this is the time where they're the most apt to be to have low libido, to not want to have sex, right? However, when you're stressed out, when you have a bunch of things on your mind, that's the best time to have sex because it gets you out of your mind and into your body and it moves some of that anxiety or whatever's stirring up inside of you. You can
mm,
like use this energy to heal that and move through it. So that's the third type. Fourth type, we ready?
yeah.
Okay, great. So the fourth type of sex or intimacy is transformational. So transformational intimacy is the type that gives you the opportunity of changing the way you see the world or changing your life or changing the ways that you might connect with others. And it's my experience that transformational intimacy can kind of feel like a plant medicine journey. Sometimes it looks like you're having a cosmic orgasm, which is the type of orgasm where it feels like you like left your body like and then came back and you're like, "Whoa, I feel different, like something shifted."
Mm,
Or it could be just like trying something new. It could mean like, maybe trying new like anal play or like connecting with a partner of the same sex for the first time or something that like kind of completely shifts the way you see intimacy, maybe is doing like a little bit of shadow work, if you will. Existential kink is another great example of transformational intimacy. You're using your sexuality to change your beliefs or the way that you look at the world.
mm,
So those are the four types of intimacy and or sexuality, and very often you'll see them kind of overlap with each other as well.
mm. Wow. Yeah, I feel that when you talked about restorative, there's so much opportunity for men in that one. Like many men, they'll need some steps before transformational, but restorative is such a potent one. It makes me think of that we're connecting our that sexual part of our body to the other parts of our body.
Yeah.
That without this education, without these practices, most men, when they're in a sexual experience, all that focus and energy is just in their genitals. And they
Uh-huh.
haven't yet learned how to have it connect to all the other areas of their body in the way that
Mhm.
you're talking about in restorative and like clearing emotions out and because it's like I feel so restored after a lot of sexual experiences because I've allowed myself to make noises, to move my body in particular ways. Like I've learned
Yeah.
these things to help run energy through. And it makes me think of even in like the Taoist practices when they would activate sexual energy and give it to certain organs in their body. Like,
Yep.
oh, bring some healing here. I'm
Yep.
gonna bring some health and vitality here. And also makes me think of like the cock heart mind connection for men that I think is such an important path for us is that we can feel that energy move up that whole pathway.
Yeah, and I feel like for a lot of men, they're like, what? No, like, and I will tell you that I've worked with men from all backgrounds, the most suspicious, like hardest, like my even my husband, he's a normal dude that works in fucking engineering and like, he didn't think that, that he was like, I didn't even know this type of stuff was possible, right? So it's totally possible. And what I can say is that it can be really powerful to, what's challenging, I think, for a lot of men is that when they're in intimate or sexual experiences, they're in a very active role, right? Like they're the ones generally that are moving the experience along. And what happens with that is a lot of the focus is outwards rather than inwards and being
Mm,
curious about what's happening in their own bodies. So when you
mm,
receive something like a tantra massage or tantric body work from someone that's in integrity with the practice, meaning they're not just giving you like a happy ending massage, they're like actually, opening things and teaching you and giving you the space to be within your body. But what happens in these types of experiences that you're completely receptive. So instead of you moving the thing along, you have this beautiful being, most likely a priestess of sorts, who is giving you this tantric massage, doing this tantric body work. And because you're not moving the experience along, you're able to be completely inward and begin to notice how these energies move in your body. And what happens is that that's like the route to mastery, right? So this is something that we teach at our Tantra Love Retreat as well, and you could have the opportunity to experience. But yeah, it's really powerful and cool stuff.
And one of the things that I see is such a struggle for men is putting the cards on the table that I don't know. It's like so woven into us to pretend that we know or
Yeah.
not be seen in our unknowing. And that's such an important part of this is the willingness to be like, I don't know this. And
Yeah.
I want to learn, and I have to learn from someone in that position because I'm realizing after your retreat in particular, I had another level of which I've had these different levels, which is the type of sex that's being had by the majority of people is like training wheels compared to the potential that exists when we
Yeah.
start working with this energy in an expansive, liberating way that
Hmm.
I just keep getting more and more blown away. I'm wondering for you, because you've been on this path a while and you're doing all these things, and I'm sure you're learning from even higher and higher teachers. It's like, do you feel the same way, or you're just like it continually expands into more and more that we can do with this relationship?
It does. I have a line in my book where I say something along the lines of like, I don't think I'm ever gonna stop, experiencing new types of intimacy or new ways of having like mind-blowing connection with other humans. And I hope that I don't. But I do agree that most people, I think that the analogy that you gave of the training wheels is apt. I also have heard others say, and I like to say, it's kind of like people are just masturbating with each other's bodies, which is also pretty limiting. And it's like, all of that energy is just really focused in the genitals, in the lower chakras, and then it just leaves the genitals. When a man comes, it's just like, whoop, there it goes, like out, instead of really maximizing and moving that energy through your body, whether or not you come. Like, I'm not someone that's like, semen retention at all. And I'm like, this is precious life force. And what if you intentionally thought about investing this energy in some way, shape, or form? I also have a lot of people that think that they have low libido or think that they're asexual, meaning that they don't have much or any sexual attraction to others. And that's a very legitimate, concern. Low libido can be caused by hormones, it can be caused by medications, mental health, so many factors. But like for me, what I notice is that, many people just aren't having crave-worthy sex. Maybe like they've maybe never had or enjoyed or desired sex, or maybe they're associating with a past trauma or otherwise. But once they learn like what's on the menu, that there's like such a buffet that can range from really energetic, teasing, sensual, all the way up to impact play and all these crazy, kinky things, like once you have the permission and the space to explore the buffet, you learn that crave-worthy sex is actually subjective. What's crave-worthy to one person can be very different to the next person. And you probably don't know what's crave-worthy to you because you don't know what's at the buffet. You've spent your whole life consuming society soup sex, which is the type of sex that, you see on porn or is like, accepted by society. It's generally portrayed as spontaneous and hyper focused on having an orgasm as fast as possible. But in reality, like for many people, like that's a very small part of what is actually turning them on. For many people, there's a more of a potentially like psychological aspect, or there's like a sensual aspect that isn't being addressed. So, yeah, those are my thoughts.
It's interesting because one of the things that I'm seeing is I think for so long it's been portrayed that men's hypersexuality is a problem. Like that's been a story that's just been told so many times. And it's interesting because now what I'm seeing we're coming into and what we're going to face as men is a lack of sexual drive.
Yep.
And I'm seeing this, I have friends that are like at a certain age and they're like, I'm just glad to not have sex rule my life so much anymore. And I'm like, yeah, but what are the unintended impacts of that? And having a sustainable, sacred, intentional relationship to sexuality for me personally, adds so much health and vitality and turn on into all the other areas of my life. And I feel like this is one of those things that we're facing right now is men from 12 to 30 are just like watching so much porn and having a relationship to sexuality in this one specific way that I don't think is healthy. And then, now we're seeing men in their late 20s and early 30s that just so many of them think they have erectile dysfunction because of the way they've related to sexuality and arousal. And we
Yeah.
need this sacred, intentional relationship to sexuality to help that is going to be an issue.
Yeah, I see this a lot with men is that they've trained themselves to come to one thing. And it's not great for them. And it's also not great for their female partners either. Um, while I think it's great for men to feel like sex isn't ruling my life anymore because I've contained it into this tiny box or whatever, it's like the sexiest thing that a man can be for a healed woman is sexually sovereign. And the beauty of this is that when you're sexually sovereign, meaning you are fully embodied in your sexuality, but also know how to harness it, like it also protects you from things like, getting caught in like the Me Too thing, whatever. A man who owns his desire without needing to act on it or be impulsive about it is really like magnetic to women, actually. This is the type of man who has his orgasm. His orgasm isn't having him. His orgasm isn't having him. He's not suppressing his sexuality, nor does he let it run him because he's fully explored it. He knows how it moves. He can see his shadows in it. He can see his little teenage boy coming out and, being like, sexually promiscuous. Like he can see that, sense it, own it, channel it, and move it into his own purpose and his power. He chooses when and how to share it. And this level of mastery also creates deep trust and polarity with the women in his life because it's no longer, his arousal is no longer a weapon. It's not this like thing that he's using to bargain. It's not this burden. It becomes a gift. It becomes this like this gift of vitality. And yeah, and it's also protecting him from manipulation. Like so many men get manipulated because their sexuality is so out in the open for women to like, use. Like you see that at, for example, strip clubs. I love strip clubs. I think that there's a lot of magic and medicine that happens in strip clubs. And you can also see a lot of men that they're just putting it all out there in a way that's like can be preyed upon by women. So you're
Oh yeah.
protecting yourself as well. So yeah, there's a lot of power in giving yourself the permission to explore these parts of yourself with, safe and sacred spaces and having conversations like these.
Hmm. So let's talk to the men here and so we've perked their interest. They're interested. They're like, oh yeah, I want to go down this path. Like, I want to bring more intentionality, more sacredness. I want expansion and liberation. And you have your book, you have your retreats, but what are some other things that you would recommend men at the beginning of their path of, okay, I don't want just one thing to bring me pleasure. I want to explore these four different types of sexes. I want to learn more about this tantra stuff and how I can expand and liberate myself. What would be your recommendations?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely my book. You can find it on Amazon, Sacred Sex Ed. Um, And otherwise, other books I recommend, you had mentioned Montauk Chia, the multi-orgasmic man. That content is a little bit prescriptive in my opinion. It's a little bit like it's very masculine and it's like this is how you do it. It's very
Yeah,
it's rigid, I guess.
yeah.
So I like it as a tool, but not as the rule. I think also just being more open, upfront, conversational with potential partners about your
Ooh.
desires, your preferences, your boundaries. Like before bringing a woman into the bedroom, can you talk to her about, your desires, your fears, and your boundaries? I think that that's something that a lot of um, individuals, both men and women, feel is really crunchy to do. Because, we haven't learned how to do it that way. We've been told that sexy sex is the spontaneous, blah, blah, blah. But in reality, what happens with that spontaneous sex, if you don't talk about your desires, your fears, or your boundaries, is that you're in your head worried, like, oh, does she like this? Is it okay if I touch her here? Has she been tested recently? Like, am I going to get her pregnant? Do I have to use a condom? And then you're not able to be in your body enjoying the moment because you're so trapped in your freaking head.
Mm.
So that's another thing that I would recommend. And again, I talk about that in the book. We also talk about that really intensively at our retreat, and you can also get lots of practice doing it there. Um, what else? What else? I think that those are some good pieces to start with. I think overall, looking into sexual shadow work is going to be really big for you. Again, the first 5 chapters of my book are all about sexual shadow work.
Mm.
Um, and I also work with people one-on-one on all of these things as well. But yeah, those are some things that I would say to start off with.
And I think it could be something as simple as getting more educated on these four types of sex and having those conversations with the people that men are being intimate with. Like,
Yeah.
hey, I'd like our sex this time to be very restorative focused or
Yeah.
transformation focused, and just practicing bringing that intentionality and communication. Because the one thing I've noticed in myself and in so many men is it's choked here. The sexual energy is just so blocked from the throat and opening and speaking or making noises. So the more that we can go have these conversations, the more we'll liberate that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally resonate. I think that the more that you can learn about what's possible, the more you begin to have frameworks to communicate what you're actually wanting to experience and desire. And you also get to share that with your partners. And also in the book, there's a deeper dive into those 4 types of sex and how to be more intentional in your intimacy as well.
Leola, thank you for being on the show. Thank you for everything you're doing in the world. I look forward to continuing to learn from you and walk this path of expansion and liberation. I'll put any of the links you want in the description for the listeners, and just thank you for coming on.
Yeah, I'll add that I do have a free shadow work workbook on my website. So if people want to access that, it's just my website and then /free
Beautiful.
too.
I'll put that in the description.
Great.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And go out there, turn your sexuality into expansion and liberation. Let's find the buffet. Let's get out of the crackers and cheese that are just at the beginning and go down further down the line. Take care,
Love it.
everybody.